What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 9 Blogger Bowl College Football Preview / Week 8 Recap. I'm Dan, and Matt is here, and Phil, Florida Phil, on a Thursday. So happy to have him. Sorry we didn't do a show on Tuesday to peel back the curtain for those of you watching. Me and my wife just got a puppy on Friday of last week, and she works in an office. I work from home, and trying to get anything done with a 12-week-old puppy in the apartment is practically impossible. So I'm barely getting my day job stuff done. So having time for our passion project that is the Blogger Bowl is a little tricky. We'll figure out the schedule as we go forward and as he kind of gets chill, but he is the best dog in the entire world. Shout out to Gus, who's at a vet appointment right now. Knock on wood. Hopefully that goes well. So so we didn't get to talk a ton of what's happened last week, or we didn't get time to talk about what happened last week. And there's a lot going on in the world of college football with what has at least been the best team on the field in 2023. But you have to wonder if the best team in 2023 is the best team in 2023 because they are cheating ass Michigan. If you've been living under a rock, they put one of their assistants on administrative leave, Connor Stallions, because Connor Stallions orchestrated the most elaborate sign stealing operation we've seen in college football in forever.
That I can remember.
And so to back up for a second, sign stealing isn't exactly against the rules in college football. In fact, if you ask any coach, they'll tell you that everyone tries to steal signs. It's part of the game. It's part of the gamesmanship of football. But in the 90s, coaches and athletic departments got tired of footing the bill to send their assistants to go scout in person. So they passed a rule that said you can't scout in person. It was strictly financial. It had nothing to do with the integrity of the game. The rule, though, is that you cannot go and scout in person. And Connor Stallions, which, by the way, like, elite fake name, to the point where, like, he probably just used his real name because people probably thought it was fake.
Would think it was a fake name.
Imagine calling, I'm sure he bought them online, but bear with me. Imagine
Hi, Mr. Stallions.
Yeah, imagine calling the Ohio State ticket office. Be like, hi, I'd like to buy 2 tickets to the Ohio State-Michigan State game this weekend. Okay, sir, what is your name? Connor Stallions. And I can just imagine the person on the other line laughing at what a fake name that is. So this guy did not do a good job of concealing anything, left a massive paper trail everywhere, bought tickets to, I think, 12 big opposing Big Ten stadiums. They went to Georgia. They scouted potential CFP team opponents in person. There's rumors they didn't go to Fort Worth, which is probably the funniest part of the whole thing. They might have gone to the Big 12 title game. Nobody has said one way or another if they scouted them at the Big 12 title game, but they did not go to Fort Worth, which might explain why they were so woefully unprepared to play TCU. Just saying. And this is a guy who, by the way, did you read the piece about his manifesto?
Yep.
He's like a 550 to 600 page manifesto of how he's gonna not take over the Michigan program, but perfect the Michigan program, or whatever the hell it is. It's just this guy's crazy.
Well, what I can't figure is he got into me. He's a lifelong Michigan fan, got into Michigan, but went to the Naval Academy instead. So it makes you wonder if part of his plan to take over Michigan football was to go to school at Navy and learn naval intelligence techniques as a way to scout opponents. This.
I actually thought I remembered seeing a tweet or something along the line saying he chose to go to the Naval Academy because he thought it gave him a better chance of being on Michigan's coaching staff in his life.
I mean,
that could be wrong. I'm not 100% sure.
I appreciate the love of college football there. That is truly on another level. I think all three of us consider ourselves pretty psycho college football fans, but a 600-page manifesto, that's almost like hat tip.
No, I feel like I could probably get through 10 pages on Notre Dame and then I'm tapping out.
Well, you're not much of a big writer.
That's true. I'm more of a not really a talker either. I don't really know what I am. Thinker. I probably thought 550 pages worth of things on Notre Dame football in my life. So there's that.
Well, we could talk about 100 pages on Sam Hartman's attractiveness.
It's true. He shaved the mustache now. He's even more handsome.
My recap notes for the show we were going to do on Tuesday are 4 pages of a Google Doc. And that's a lot.
That's Dan's manifesto.
That's
but that's on college football as a whole, not just Michigan.
Matt, the Danifesto.
The Danifesto. There it is.
I like that.
The Danifesto. I'm not ever going to get up in arms. I guess my response to this entire thing is that it's just hilarious. Like,
I think it's hilarious.
I'm not going to get mad that they were trying to steal signs, that they went to these lengths to steal signs. I'm almost never going to side with the NCAA in anything. So I'm not going to side with the NCAA here in this matter. Like, what they did was against the rules. They're going to be punished and like, fine, whatever. But like, it's just an absolutely batshit crazy and hilarious story. And that's really the one legitimate takeaway, I think.
Yeah,
the fact that they're getting turned in from within, though, like it's an inside job. It's whatever Jim Stapleton, I think, is the name of he's on the NCAA infractions committee, but he's a big Michigan donor. He just hates Jim Harbaugh. So this is reportedly like him, Michigan donor who's got the wheels moving on this, got the wheels in motion, because it's like, according to the Washington Post, this is an outside law firm that has like all the information, has been doing the investigation, which means somebody turned stuff over to them.
Yeah, like the Athletic reported, I think last night, or confirmed anyway, that it was the outside private investigator who turned over all this information to the end. Somebody hired a private investigator to investigate if Michigan was stealing signs. That is absolutely insane. And I really, really, really hope it was Ryan Day. That might be the most likable thing that Ryan Day has ever done. If it was Ryan Day who was the one who initiated this investigation, that would be incredible. Like, oh my God, they beat us 2 years in a row. Something must be up. I'm going to hire a private investigator to figure it out.
I'll say this though. It's like, I don't think Michigan is a team based on the roster that they've built over the past couple of years, and especially this year, that needs to be stealing signs. And so what they've done, at least I think for any like Michigan fan, is it's put an asterisk around them, because there's no way they can say it didn't help us, right? But I think what you can objectively say is they almost certainly didn't, and probably didn't need to be doing any of these things. They've been blowing people out like crazy this year.
Well, they've also played nobody.
Exactly. That's the worst part about it. It's not like they've been.
They're up 7-6 in the third quarter against Bowling Green, who I'm sure they didn't steal their signs. Yeah. Why would they steal Bowling Green's? I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
I think the big question for me here, though, and again, like, I don't really care about sign stealing. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but it was such an awful effort and such like an FU in the face to like the rules, and based on the just obnoxious paper trail that they left, and are caught so aggressively red-handed with paper trails, with emails, with Venmos, with video evidence over the course of the last couple of years, advanced scouting, and potentially sharing that information with other college football playoff contenders. Like, I think when it gets to that level, the fact that it's happening, it's not like this is, hey, they caught them, they did this 2 years ago. It happened this season. So the biggest thing for me is, hey, NCAA, College Football Playoff Committee, Big Ten, you caught someone who's essentially the number one team in the country, number two team in the country, cheating during the season that you can't say didn't have an impact on games. Whether I don't think it probably actually did, but like you can't
definitively say that.
You can't definitively say that this didn't provide them an edge in games so far this year. So it opens this fascinating question of, hey, if you catch someone cheating during the season and have evidence of cheating inside season, there has to be some form of ramifications in season, you'd think, right? The NCAA won't do anything because it'll take a long investigation. It'll take another year. But will this impact? And I saw Matt sent me what Josh Pate said, whatever, can't remember, Pat said that curious if the College Football Playoff Committee will take this into consideration. You think they might, but it's just like it's a really completely unknown dynamic of something happening in season. Like, do they vacate the current wins in season and then playoff ban? Who knows?
They won't do anything, because what is the college football playoff? It is a made-for-TV event. It is nothing more, nothing less than a way to get people to watch college football games. It has nothing to do with anything else. So what's a good way to get people to watch? Is to put a controversial team in it. If they're undefeated, look, Michigan's got to run the table. They're not going to go with one loss. We know that. Their schedule's too bad. So they've got to run the table to do it. And if they run the table, they beat Ohio State, they beat Penn State, they beat whoever comes out of the West, who cares? They're going to be in the playoff, because the controversy is going to sell. And so the playoff committee is feckless in that. They're not going to do anything. I think the other reason this is funny, I forgot to bring this up, is because if there's like a fan base that looks down upon the rest of like the cheating ass world of college football, it's always been Michigan. It's like we're above that. And now they're the ones who are embroiled in this controversy. That's kind of hilarious. But like, yes, it helped. I'm sure it helped them to some degree. It is very, pardon me, getting like political from the 1970s. It is kind of Nixonian and the paranoia of like, you're going to win most of these games, if not all of them. You don't need to do this. Why are you doing this? Which is what brought down the Nixon administration. Like, they were going to win that election. They didn't need to do all that. It's very Nixonian. So like, yeah, it probably helped them, but like they're going to get the NCAA slap on the wrist. The playoff committee is not going to do anything because controversy is going to sell their TV asset there. And I wouldn't expect that the committee is going to do anything.
I mean, from the NCAA standpoint, I can see a situation where they vacate wins, but I'm curious, but it's also just, it's going to be stupid because if nothing happens this year, they win the national championship. Next year, they say, hey, all your wins are vacated. It's kind of like, okay, so then no one wins the national championship this year. It's just, I mean, the NCAA is going to pick and choose what they want to do, like they always do. I know they vacated all of Notre Dame wins in like 2012 because a couple of players cheated on a test. It's like versus this, which is like an intricate sign stealing thing to gain an advantage over other teams. I just don't see a situation where everyone in the country is now hate watching Michigan and wanting them to lose, which I can get on board with at the very least.
I've been on board for that for a long time.
They'll vacate wins, that's for sure. I know that. But I don't know that they can take away a national championship because they don't award the national championship. The FBS national championship is an independent entity.
True.
The highest level of football that the NCAA awards a championship for is FCS. So I don't know that they can take away a national championship. So it'd be kind of funny if Michigan has to vacate a 15-0 season and it's still the national champions. Also, if I'm a Michigan fan and that happens, I don't care. I will have watched them.
Oh, yeah. No, if Michigan wins the national championship, it doesn't matter if it's vacated or whatever. Whatever. I saw my team win.
It'll be a funny talking point throughout history, though.
Yeah. So, like, the campus parking cop ass NCAA can go kick rocks. Matt, Phil, and I have kind of dominated this conversation. You're stuck right there in the middle. What are your thoughts on this? What do you have to add? Because I don't want this just to be a back and forth between Phil and me.
I'm hurt. I'm devastated that a school, an elite, prestigious program like the University of Michigan would do this, would spit in the face of the game that I love, and just really, betray everybody that loves college football and its purity. And just the beauty of a Saturday afternoon watching college football at the Big House or at Notre Dame Stadium or in Ohio State. It's been soiled forever thanks to the University of Michigan. It's a shame what they've done. It's going to take me years to get over, and I'm not sure I'll ever recover this, nor will the sport of college football. And if they take that from me, except for Jim Harbaugh, he can be suspended and then leave for the Chicago Bears. I don't think he knew anything about it. He's responsible for it. He's responsible for it because he's the head of the program, but I don't think he knew anything about it. So I think once he gets suspended, maybe just go coach in the NFL, maybe a team you used to play for, something like that. Just go get your Super Bowl and then take off now. But no, seriously, I am interested to see how the Big Ten handles this because that's the one kind of thing we haven't crossed. Obviously, I don't necessarily think the Big Ten is going to come down super hard in season on a team that could be one of their two playoff teams that's undefeated and looking like the best team, but also they're going to have a lot of very pissed off members in that conference, including the one that Michigan plays at the end of the season that is their cash cow that brings them all their money. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Ohio State factors into a Michigan punishment, how much they're pushing the Big Ten, what the Big Ten can actually do. That's kind of the one factor. If they step in, when they step in, how much information do they have? How pissed off is the rest of the conference? How much pressure are they putting on? Like what kind of goes on there? That's kind of the next domino, I think, to drop for me. Because the college football playoff, I don't think is going to do anything. Ward Manuel, Michigan's AD, is on the college football playoff committee. I don't see them
I think the punishment has got to fit the crime here. So I think an adequate punishment is force them to play all their home games in November and December at 11 a.m. in Evanston, and their fans aren't allowed to buy games. I think that's the only suitable punishment.
That's fair. That's fair. I respect that.
All right, so moving on to the on-field stuff that happened last week.
That was fun.
Yeah, I know.
I didn't even intentionally wear a Notre Dame hoodie today. I happened to have that on when we were talking about Michigan.
I intentionally wore one of my new Idaho.
My new Maction shirt came in, so I'll wear that on Tuesday.
Yeah. Ohio State 20, Penn State 12. We'll kind of go through the recap quick. I'm going to read a list of names. Jahan Dotson, KJ Hamler, Deshaun Hamilton, Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson. Ohio State is wide receiver U right now, but Penn State usually has a guy at the position they can lean on to make big plays when they need to. This game came down to the fact that Ohio State has Marvin Harrison Jr. and Penn State doesn't. 162 of Kyle McCord's 286 pass yards were to Marvin Harrison Jr. If you want to take the rosiest position on this game, both defenses are very good. Both defenses answered the call, but man, I don't know how you could watch that game and think that either quarterback rather has enough there to be able to beat a team like Michigan. You also have two coaches who just coach scared. We knew this was going to happen. Penn State was so afraid of Drew Aller, they're running on third down and kicking field goals. Ryan Day never met a plus territory situation that he couldn't will into a field goal attempt. Watching this game, it really feels like Michigan should be a huge favorite to win the Big Ten, barring their season just being completely vacated because of the controversy going on. It just wasn't. It was kind of what we expected, I think, at the end of the day. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I was going into this game like I don't think either quarterback has it, and I mean, all season, I think I said before this game last week, it's like Penn State has put handcuffs on Drew Aller all season, and they expected him just to suddenly like step up in a big game when they haven't given him any opportunity to make real downfield throws. And it's like you don't just do that in a big game against the best defense that you've played all year. So it went for Penn State's offense exactly how I thought it was going to go. They weren't explosive. The play calling was awful. And James Franklin just turtled the entire game. And I think Ryan Day probably knew that was going to be the case. And so he just did his thing. It was like, I can be conservative, but man, there was a stretch there in the first half where it was just like bad pass after bad pass. And you're like, what are we doing here? It made, I'm sure it made Matt miss his Penn State legend quarterback from last year and just hoping that he came back from the grave.
Oh, the same guy who put up like 10 points at Michigan last year against the worst Michigan team, Sean Clifford.
Hey, would be better. Would have been better than
you sure about that? You sure about that? No,
yes.
You're not.
An NFL quarterback, Matt.
You sure about that? I don't. Obviously, the offenses weren't good. I think Phil has a good point. Like Drew Aller played terrible, but I thought Penn State put him in James Franklin, most importantly, put him in like a bad spot to succeed. You don't just suddenly open up the offense against not only the best defense you faced this year, but like one of the best defenses in the country. And I do think that's something that's maybe not getting lost, but getting overlooked a little bit here. While the offenses did not look good, like Penn State still has a very good running game. Ohio State, Marvin Harrison Jr. got his. Like Ohio State has a pretty decent running game. Like those defenses were just lights out. Those are two very, very good defenses, and they did what they should do to quarterbacks that weren't necessarily certain of themselves, that maybe weren't put in the best position to succeed, especially Drew Aller. I push back on that Michigan is going to like roll these teams because, again, we haven't seen Michigan play anybody worth a shit yet. And like, do I think that they should be favored against Penn State and Ohio State right now? Yes, I do. But I still don't really have much of a sample size because the last time we saw this team play a good football team, they lost by 20 points to TCU in the college football playoff. And that's not like, I'm not trying to, I know I probably sound like a sarcastic asshole right now, but like, I'm not actually trying to be sarcastic about Michigan. I'm not trying to not give them their flowers, but like, I haven't seen them play a football team yet. Once they play a football team, if they go out and beat Penn State by 3 touchdowns in Happy Valley, I will happily say they are the best team in the Big Ten and they should be favored. But like, I got to see it just because we haven't seen it yet. And I don't think Penn State has a very good chance or much of a chance outside of possessing the ball for like 40 of the 20 minutes in that game and Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen just going off. But Ohio State, while Kyle McCord didn't look good, Kyle McCord still has Marvin Harrison Jr., Cade Stover, and Emeka Egbuka. And you don't have to be all that good if your offensive line protects and your receivers get open, because he's good enough to hit those guys.
So one other thought coming off this game that I want to make a bigger point of is this. I'm going to ask you guys this because it's something I haven't been able to get out of my brain, and I'm gonna be the one leading the charge on this since we are a national show. We have a huge following. I'm just making that up, but
It's massive.
Marvin Harrison Jr.
3 people watching.
It's time for Marvin Harrison Jr. to get some more respect in the Heisman race, because if you missed the Arizona State Washington game, Washington was horrible in that game. And Michael Penix Jr. was awful. He had a fumble. He had 2 interceptions. He didn't throw a touchdown pass, I don't believe.
No.
Late.
He
Didn't throw a touchdown pass in that game. They needed a late pick 6 with Arizona State driving in deep into Washington territory to win that game. And as a result, J.J. McCarthy is now your Heisman favorite. And if J.J. McCarthy is the Heisman favorite, that should be the tipping point that we need to start the discussion of we need to just award it to the best player in college football. Now, I think the books are overreacting to the bad performance from Penix, who's still on pace for almost 4,800 yards and almost 40 touchdowns. I feel like, obviously, if they run the table, he's going to win it. If they lose one,
he's got plenty of big spots ahead of him, too.
Yeah, he's got plenty of big spots ahead. I think that Jaden Daniels is starting to get a lot of love in that even if they lose to Alabama, if he has a huge game and a loss and they win the rest of their games, he might even get consideration. But J.J. McCarthy is on pace for 2,923 passing yards. Since 1987, 3 quarterbacks have won the Heisman Trophy with fewer than 3,000 passing yards. Eric Crouch, Cam Newton, and Troy Smith. Crouch and Newton both ran for over 1,000 yards. Troy Smith is the actual analog here because he didn't run the ball a lot either, and he won that Heisman Trophy because he won that game of the century when Michigan Ohio State was 1-2. The 2 best players in college football are Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brock Bowers.
Yep.
And Brock Bowers is hurt. And I mean, obviously, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to win the Heisman, Ohio State has to beat Michigan. Duh, no shit. But like, if they do and he has a big game, there's no reason why we shouldn't be considering him to win the award. I don't understand how. It's just so bizarre to me that in 2020, if you look at what Mac Jones did at Alabama and what J.J. McCarthy is doing this year, Mac Jones's numbers were way, way, way better. But we somehow decided that the second best wide receiver on that team, Devontae Smith, was the best player in the country because Jalen Waddle got hurt, and he had a huge year after Jalen Waddle got hurt. Marvin Harrison Jr. has the built-in factor that I think a lot of people think he is one of the best, if not the best players in college football. But it feels like, and I know he's had some games where he hasn't put up a ton of huge stats, but like at a certain point, if we're going to just give it to J.J. McCarthy, who's going to throw for under 3,000 yards, we should probably consider just giving it to the best player in college football.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think he's the best player in college football. If Brock Bowers was healthy, I think he should win it 100% of the time. But missing, 4 to 6 weeks and potentially into the year, like you just can't. I almost wish they would just like take a snapshot and say, you know what, Brock Bowers is the best player in college football this year. Give it to him. But yeah, McCarthy is good. Like I'm not a McCarthy hater by any stretch of the means, but he's not the dynamic best player in college football. Especially because they haven't played anybody and he still isn't putting up ridiculous numbers. Now, if he had been putting up ridiculous numbers against that competition, it's like, hey, it doesn't really matter. Still putting up absurd yards, give him the Heisman, best player on the best team in the country. That's not the case. So I'm completely on board, especially understanding that Ohio State doesn't have an elite distributor getting him the ball each time. So it's not like he's having to do a lot of it on his own. It's a lot of 50-50.
He's doing a lot of the work.
Exactly. And so I'm fully in that camp. I think with Egbuka being out a little bit as well, too, it's like he stepped up in the game with Egbuka out last week. He needs to win the Heisman unless McCarthy comes out and like puts up huge numbers against Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State. If that's the case, I don't have much of an issue with it. If he goes and like is the reason Michigan wins those games. But if he's not and just kind of keeps going as is, just turned into a quarterback award for however many years now. And so I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the most deserving of it by a wide margin right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this, I shouldn't say a lot of this, but something that factors into, McCarthy being now the favorite is obviously he is the favorite at sports books. And I think a lot of sports books just default to quarterback on best team playing well. And that's where I think you see a lot of networks feed off like, oh, okay, JJ McCarthy's the favorite. So that's kind of where the narrative starts. But like Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best football player in the country. If we get to Michigan, I mean, I think this award very well could come down to Michigan, Ohio State. Obviously, Penix might still be in the driver's seat. I think if he goes undefeated, beats USC, beats Oregon again, I forget who else they have on their schedule, but they had somebody else good in the Pac-12. Like if he runs the table, looks good doing it, gets Washington to the playoff, he's going to win the Heisman Trophy. If they slip up again, it probably does come down to Michigan, Ohio State. I think like it probably comes down to that game, and if Michigan wins, even if it's just an okay performance from JJ McCarthy where they lean heavily on the run game, I still think he wins the Heisman. If Ohio State wins, as long as Marvin Harrison doesn't get shut out, I think it's probably his award to lose. But like he should be getting a lot more talk than he is right now. Like both of you guys said, there's not any quarterback around this year that's having as good of a year outside of Michael Penix, who again had a bad week. But it's really annoying that this is just becoming a quarterback award as opposed to the best player in college football.
I agree. All right. Alabama, Tennessee. Alabama 34, Tennessee 20. Tennessee played a really good first half, better than I think any of us thought they would. It kind of fell apart on them in the second half. They got outscored 27-0 in the second half. So I'm just because, we're already running kind of long. I just want to give some love to Jalen Milroe here. Alabama's had some incredibly successful quarterbacks in recent years. Now, obviously like the first 7-ish years of this dynasty, it was caretaker quarterbacks, but then you have like the Jalen Hurts, Tua, Mac Jones, Bryce Young were all incredible college quarterbacks. The bar has been set exceptionally high at a program where expectations are exceptionally high. Milroe took a ton of crap early in the season. He struggled against Texas with a lot of throws. They panic benched him for the South Florida game. He's taken a beating this year, sacked 4 more times on Saturday. Alabama has now allowed as many sacks as Colorado. They now have the highest sack percentage allowed in all of FBS, but he continues to find ways to make plays and help Alabama win. He was great in the second half against Tennessee. It's hard to know if he's good or what his ceiling is because of how bad the offensive line is, but if nothing else, he's got a ton of heart and character and is the kind of player you can win football games with at the highest level.
Yeah, I think his ceiling is a pretty good college football quarterback, and there's nothing wrong with that. He just is following a whole bunch of Alabama quarterbacks that were, elite 5-star prospects. He's not that guy, but they can win football games with him. And he's, like Dan said, proven that he's got a lot of heart. You can never really count him out in a spot. And that game was, I know the offensive line still has things to work on, and I'm not sure they're going to get it corrected if they haven't gotten it corrected by now. But that Alabama team showed that, they might not be Georgia or Michigan this year. Like, they still got something in them. And that second half was like a flash of old Alabama dominance where they just came out of the locker room and immediately like, no, we're not going to lose this football game. And then they were down to 20-7.5, and they end up covering the 8.5. Like, they just came out and absolutely flexed their muscles. They were dominant. I'm really excited to see them play LSU in a couple weeks. I know we've had a couple debates back and forth here. LSU's offense is good, but that defense has been so bad. And if there's a get right spot for Alabama's offensive line, it very well might be against them. That one's in Bama. Man, that one's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll save my hot takes for that week, but it's been fun watching Alabama this year. It's mostly because it's not the traditional dominant Alabama team. So it is fun to see Saban and the team dig deep in those big moments, which is, I feel like, is usually reserved for national championship games or games against Georgia, or like a hiccup here or there, but these aren't like hiccup games. They're just not as good this year. So it's fun to see them like constantly in these competitive SEC games where it's not like they've shit the bed all game, but it's just like, hey, this is a competitive game. We saw it against Arkansas. We saw it against Texas A&M. Now we saw it against Tennessee. So it's, in a way, this is, one of Saban's better coaching jobs, simply because they're not that dominant team, and he's having to find creative ways to win without a dynamic play caller or signal caller or even game manager. So it's been exciting to watch their games, and I'm, excited is an understatement to watch the game against LSU, because it's going to be a different LSU-Alabama game than we've seen in a really long time. And I think it's going to be, definitely, I'm very interested to see what that over-under total is going to be, because I think it's going to be pretty high.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I know.
It'll be in the 60s, and Alabama's going to win that game. We're having
never count out Brian Kelly against the top 10 team on the road. You never count him out.
Yeah, we were having a chat, and
that goes well always. We'll talk about that in a couple weeks.
Another big game.
That's not next week, is it? Next week? Wow.
Next week, yeah.
Utah 34, USC 32. I'm going to save my Utah thoughts to kind of roll that into the Oregon game preview. Say this about USC. Utah continues to be this weird antithetical boogeyman for USC, which is kind of amazing. I'll give USC credit. They did not quit. They were down 28-14. They could have just packed it in and gone back to their dorms. I was going to say home, but they're playing at home. They came back and they had a chance to win the game, but they did not. The end of game stuff is going to raise eyebrows. Caleb Williams just kind of sat there on the bench at the end of the game, not really engaged with what was going on. Lincoln Riley has been MIA with pneumonia this week, which honestly, I'm not going to make jokes.
He's got pneumonia.
That's the report is he's missing practice because he's getting over pneumonia. I hope that's fair. The case.
That's kind of a quick turnaround time to get over pneumonia for being healthy Saturday.
I don't know. I will say Lincoln Riley refused to make players available to the media after that, which isn't the end of the world. But it does kind of speak to some of the stuff I talked about last week with how he handles the non-football related stuff as a head coach. It's also, though, extremely funny in another sense, guys. In May, the National Labor Relations Board in Los Angeles filed a complaint against USC in an effort to try and make some headway into the issue of college athletics and athletes being labeled as employees. Last Thursday, literally 2 days before the game, USC filed a motion to dismiss. And part of their argument was that interviews with the media are, quote, part of their educational experience at USC, end quote. And then 2 days later, Lincoln Riley doesn't let him talk to the media after the game. We can kind of do the Utah discussion with Oregon, guys. I mean, Matt, you and I talked about, or we talked about it on the we talked about it on the recap show, just like where USC was. And I just I don't know that much changed with how we feel about USC.
No, they lost a tough game at home, and the schedule doesn't really get much easier. I think they're probably going to end up finishing 8-4, and we're going to have a lot of questions about them after the year of, all right, year one was a fun Lincoln Riley year, and they should build on that. And then, oh no, they didn't build on that. They took a big step backwards. And there's a lot of questions in that program. There's a lot of questions. I mean, it's already leaking that, Lincoln Riley, I know Dan talked about it, and it's kind of leaking Lincoln Riley could have potential NFL interest in the coming years. And how's that going to factor in? And is who in the NFL is really going to be super interested after this coaching job? I'm sure somebody will, probably Jerry Jones when Mike McCarthy inevitably gets fired eventually. I don't know. It's just a weird team because they are super talented. They seem less tough and less physically tough and less mentally tough than even Lincoln Riley's Oklahoma teams. And those teams were pretty much known for when they get punched in the mouth, laying down pretty quickly. And that seems to be what USC does. Utah came in there, and I know Caleb Williams played fine, but he wasn't great. And he got beat by a third string pig farmer quarterback and Bryson Barnes. That was maybe the greatest quote of all time. I love Kyle Whittingham. I don't know if it says more about USC or Utah that game, maybe a little bit of both, but it was just the whole USC thing is just weird this year. It's very strange.
Yeah, USC, it's kind of like Lincoln Riley has shown us who he is for his entire coaching career. So at this point, I'm just not surprised he's just showing an unwillingness to adapt his coaching style, despite the fact that every single year his teams come out, put up a ridiculous amount of points, have a flashy offense, and their defense is just miserable each year. And then they fade late in the year because they get punched in the mouth and they're generally soft. And I think taking a step further with the media stuff, it's just kind of that same vein where it's just almost a lack of accountability, a lack of wanting to be exposure to difficult questions and things like that. It's just a soft program. And I think it fits the bill with some of the huge scale NIL stuff that they're doing. It's you can't have a culture in which you have big NIL type incentives, all of that inside of the program, and be this soft, right? And I think it's just, that's for me the only way to describe Lincoln Riley's coaching style is very soft. And it shows in his game plan executions. It shows in his inability to get rid of his miserable defensive coordinator. It's just, and I don't see him changing. So it's going to take we've seen great coaches adapt over time, and I just haven't seen Riley do it. It's just the same thing. So it's kind of like Oklahoma's going to Oklahoma at some point. It's just like Lincoln Riley. Maybe it's just Lincoln Riley's just going to keep Lincoln Riley over and over again.
Yeah, I agree.
This is wild they've taken this big of a step back in year two.
Yeah.
Because I get some of the stuff that happened last year. All right, you went to Utah, which, by the way, they very well could have won that game at Utah. It's not like they folded that one. Yeah, their defense wasn't good, but Utah at night wearing all black went out and won 43-42 on a 2-point conversion late. Okay, that happens. Caleb Williams gets hurt in the Pac-12 championship game. Yeah, they got bullied and beat up a little bit in that one, but your quarterback got hurt. Utah won the football game. That happens. The Tulane game, your defense stunk, but that was a team playing. That was Tulane's Super Bowl. That was and still USC almost won that football game.
Right.
But then like this year, like the losses this year are obviously not that way. Like the Notre Dame loss, they just got beat up. The Utah loss, okay, they came back and fought a little bit, took a late lead, but like they got beat the hell up, and then they imploded on Utah's final drive with that just terrible targeting penalty. It was on Bear Robinson or whatever, the defensive lineman's name. I know his first name is Bear. I forgot his last name. Alexander. I knew it was somewhat of a generic last name. And then the very next play, they let Bryson Barnes scramble for that 25-yard run and set up the not chip shot field goal, but 30-yard field goal. Like, it's just weird to see a program take this big of a step back in year two with a head coach that's supposed to be this, savior, bringing them back, perfect fit for USC, all that. You rarely ever see this year two decline. In college, at least. The NFL, sure. In college.
Well, when you live and die by the portal, that's what's going to happen for a lot. The ebbs and flows are going to be pretty great for some of these teams. Like when you don't build any kind of culture and you're just trying to win quickly, that's what's going to happen. On the Utah side of things, we spin it forward to this week because I really only have two games that I'm two games I find super interesting this week. Utah, they host Oregon. Cam Rising and Brant Keithy officially shut down for the year. However, Matt alluded to this earlier after the USC game, Kyle Whittingham with the quote of the year in college football about Bryson Barnes saying, quote, USC, they've got a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback, so they're going to make some things, and that's just the way it is. But we've got ourselves a pig farmer at quarterback, so we're proud of that guy too. I was very impressed.
Proud of him because he's a pig farmer, not because he's a good quarterback. He's a pig farmer, so we're proud of that too.
I was very impressed by Bryson Barnes' toughness against USC, but he is what he is as a quarterback. Alex Grinch said they didn't defend the wheel routes with Sione Vaki very well because they hadn't seen them on film. So what possible wrinkles could Utah have for this game against a team that is actually well coached? We'll find out. On the other side, Oregon isn't exactly the high-flying offense we associate with Oregon football in the past. Bo Nix is the 4th lowest ADOT in the country, and they have the 6th worst explosive pass play rate in the country. They prefer the stab you 100 times and watch you slowly bleed to death method of offense, which has been working great for them. They're top 10 in EPA and success rate, both rushing and passing. They create quality drives. They finish those quality drives. Utah got worked a little bit defensively by USC, so maybe there's some concern. They're just so stingy at home in general. This line opened 5.5. Jumped to 7. There was some buyback to get it to 6.5, which is where it has been sitting since yesterday. Feels like an underish game. The total has dropped 2 points, so people agree with that. I don't want to bet against Utah at home. I don't know that they just have enough firepower to win this game, and maybe SLC is just magic. We'll find out. If it was 7, huh?
That's the thing. SLC does feel like it's magic. If this game was at Autzen Stadium, I would lay like 13.5 with Oregon and think they'd probably run away with this one. But just weird stuff happens there, and I don't know how. There's just some voodoo magic on Kyle Whittingham's slick back hair that he just kind of goes like that a couple times, and some good stuff starts to happen for Utah. I'm not really sure, but everything in my college football brain says Oregon should win this football game, but it's Utah. It's at Utah. It's not at night, which I think hurts. If this was at night, I might actually pick Utah outright to win. But this game, like Utah's just like Salt Lake City's a weird place to play. It's really hard to go in there and win a football game. I think I'm with you on the under here, Dan, because I mean Utah's quarterback situation is a little bit dire. We saw them against a good defensive team in Oregon State struggle to score on that was on the road, but like I have no idea what's going to happen on Saturday in this game.
I'm the exact opposite of both you guys. I like the over 47.5, and I like Oregon outright pretty easily, in my opinion. I think it's going to be tough for Utah coming back after a big night game. Oregon with the emotional loss 2 weeks ago, the get right win, and then I think they're going to roll. I think Oregon's offense is better than USC's offense. I think they're going to be able to put up more than 35 points. It's kind of why I'm liking the over there. But I just think this is a motivated Oregon team who knows that they're not out of it yet. Obviously, Utah isn't completely out of it by any stretch of the matter either. But I think this is going to be a statement win for Oregon. Again, if it was a night game, I'd feel different. If the Washington game was last week, I'd feel different. If the Utah game wasn't at night last week, I might feel different. So there's a lot of factors that are driving that. But again, my gut is going Oregon and over in this one. I think Oregon, again, it's going to be a good game, but I think Oregon can win by 10 to 17 points in this one.
Wow.
I think that's I'm actually happy that one of us actually took that the thought process of no, just Oregon's the better football team, because they are the much better football team, right? Not necessarily with a healthy Cam Rising. We can have a different conversation. Obviously, that's not the case. Like, Oregon's a better football team playing better football, and they're past the Washington situation. Like you said, they're also past like the come down game against Washington State. This is a game that they are, I think, just a better football team that they should cover. They should win. I don't know. Something's
I think the biggest
pulling
thing
me back.
The biggest thing that's sticking out for me is going to be Oregon facing some potential short fields and being able to score quickly. Because I think there could be some opportunities where Utah has some potential quick 3-and-outs in which they, can't connect on a pass, have a couple run games against a pretty stout run defense. And Oregon's taking the ball over at their own 40, their own, past their own 45, something along those lines. And in those situations, that's where Oregon can strike and does strike very quickly. So I can see a couple quick, late scores and things spiraling for Utah pretty quickly in that situation.
I think the other question that I have, just kind of thinking about this just now, is this is going to might become sort of a magnifying glass game for Dan Lanning, because let's not forget, he's a guy who coaches very aggressively, and they're going to be on the one thing that might benefit Utah in this game is if Oregon is too aggressive and goes for a lot of fourth downs and doesn't convert, those kinds of things. I would also think that Utah's going to probably have to bring some tricks out of their bag to make that happen. The only other game that I find super interesting this week is the world's largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville, Georgia versus Florida. I don't really think Florida's going to win. But nevertheless, with games like this, I always try to think in terms of how can a big underdog pull off an upset in a rivalry game. For the Florida offense, it's staying ahead of the chains. 18th in the country in early down EPA and 101st in the country in third and fourth down success rate. On the other side of the ball, it's been the opposite. They're 114th in early down EPA defense and 9th and third and fourth down success rate. Obviously, stay ahead of the chains is good advice in any game, but it's been a strength for Florida on offense and a weakness on defense. They're 119th in tempo also. So the best bet for them is going to try to slow down the game, create some variance by limiting the number of possessions, steal some possessions where you can, hope that ETN can have a big game here. I'm also excited again to see what Carson Beck has. It's his first real big test without Brock Bowers, the safety net there. Florida is 25th in pass defense success rate, but 62nd in EPA per pass defense. So what does that tell you? They give up a lot of explosive plays in the passing game. They're in fact the third worst at pass play explosiveness on defense, so that they don't limit the big plays. If Carson Beck hits those big plays, Florida is going to be in a world of hurt. This is a game where weird things have happened a lot in the past. You can kind of throw out the record books a little bit here. It's a big test. Both teams coming off a bye. Big test for Georgia. Their schedule seems a little bit more daunting without Brock Bowers, and they still have to play Tennessee, still have to play Missouri, who's got a really good offense, and obviously the SEC championship game if it gets that far. But what are your expectations for this one?
I am just mostly incredibly curious to see how Georgia looks without Brock Bowers, because you got to imagine they probably lose that Auburn game without him when they say, hey, you know what, why don't we just throw to Brock Bowers every single play and he'll make every single play. And so Carson Beck has looked much better. I think he's been better than we gave him credit for earlier in the year, but how is he without Brock Bowers? And so that's going to be really interesting. Graham Mertz has played for the most part pretty well this year. You look at his stats, he's over 70% completion. He hasn't been a game breaker by any means, but he's shown some significant improvements. And so I think if him and Ricky Pearsall can get going, this would be a pretty interesting game. Again, I'm staying away from betting, staying away from lines, because we just don't know when your team loses the best player in the country, what do they look like? And so that's the situation where you don't know. So I'm very curious to see how Kirby Smart and the offense responds when you have a young quarterback without the best player in college football. So this would be a huge game for Carson Beck. But at the end of the day, I expect a pretty close game. I expect a bit of a weird game. I expect some big momentum shifts. I think the biggest thing that Georgia can do to ensure that Florida doesn't make a run is win the turnover battle. Because if Graham Mertz is losing the turnover battle early, he can implode. We've seen it multiple times throughout his career. And so that's something that I'm going to be monitoring in this one is who's winning that turnover battle. Because ultimately, I think that'll dictate not necessarily who will win this game, but if this is a very close game or if Georgia can really pull away. Because if they get, 2 turnovers and, by the third quarter, this one could get ugly.
Yeah, I want to see a fast start from Georgia because it seems like a lot, even last year when they had a really dominant team, won the national championship. There were times where they'd just kind of start slow and then they'd have trouble getting out of that lull against teams that they were better than. They'd still obviously end up winning. But like we've seen that a couple times this year too. Vandy, they started slow. Auburn, obviously, they started slow and had to win in the fourth quarter. I'd like to see them come out, like Phil said, win the turnover battle early, get Graham Mertz a little bit shaken. Carson Beck played pretty well early, maybe put a couple touchdowns on the board in the first quarter. Florida probably wilts and dies early. But we're talking about the Heisman Trophy. Carson, if you like Carson Beck and you like Georgia to run the table and get to the college football playoff and win the SEC, this might not be a bad time to sprinkle Carson Beck because he's 35-1. And like Dan said, the schedule's starting to look not by any means super difficult, but more daunting than we thought it might at the beginning of the year. And he's going to have this game. He's going to have Tennessee. He's going to have the SEC championship game. I think Missouri's on there too, who's been a good football team so far this year. And if Carson Beck goes out, plays well, puts up numbers without Brock Bowers, and Georgia's undefeated going to the college football playoff, that's a guy who's going to start picking up some votes and gaining some steam, in my opinion. The loss of Brock Bowers is awesome. I wish that he was playing because that is Carson Beck's safety blanket. That's the guy that Carson Beck loves. He is the best. Him and Marvin Harrison Jr. are the two best players in college football. But if he goes out and impresses and plays well and runs the table and puts up big numbers without Brock Bowers, and everybody knows that narrative of his best players out, and he's still doing this, he's getting better. I think that's a guy who you see maybe as a finalist in New York with a chance to win the Heisman.
And listen to this stretch. So it's Florida, Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Georgia Tech in a rivalry game. I mean, it's not a big game, but it's just like it means a lot for whatever. He can dominate in a rivalry game, and then the SEC championship game. So that stretch is, going to be 4 ranked teams, at least one top 10 matchup, a borderline ranked Florida team. So it is, in terms of stretches, we talk about with the Heisman, like, hey, you have to kind of get right at the right times and have those types of moments. He will have it, and he'll have the opportunity to take it. And without Brock Bowers, it will elevate him significantly in terms of who's responsible for those wins.
A couple weeks ago, right before a meeting, I messaged Matt and I was like, hey, do you have any money in Bet Rivers? And can you bet the Heisman in Illinois? And he was like, you can bet the Heisman, but I don't have any money in Bet Rivers. The reason was because this was before Brock Bowers got hurt, but Carson Beck was still 200-1 to win the Heisman Trophy, and absolutely was a bet on price at that point. And in all honesty, guys, I still think if Bowers were healthy, I still think Carson Beck's more likely to win the Heisman Trophy just because he's a quarterback. And now, obviously, that he's going to have to do without Brock Bowers, I certainly think it increases his case. We'll see how he looks this week. Obviously, if he has a big game, that number is going to come down a good bit. Before we do bets, are there any other games that you guys are interested in this weekend that you want to talk about, or do you guys want to just roll into our bets?
Just a stinky ranked matchup between Duke and Louisville.
It's wild that we have a ranked on ranked matchup that we're not even consider. Like we didn't even.
You see that, and it just the game kind of reeks because Jordan doesn't look like he's going to play, which is Louisville's best player.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that. Oh, boy.
Looks like Riley Leonard might not be back yet either after getting banged up again. So even if those guys both play, they're not going to be at their best. Like Leonard, he's a gutsy guy. I like him a lot. I like Jordan a lot. They're both really good players, and this would be a better matchup. So. We're going into our picks in a second, but like, when was the last time we had like a top 25 ranked matchup on a weekend where there's not too many ranked matchups? And we see this game, we're like, this game's going to be just an ugly football game.
What about the Phil Jurkovec revenge game again?
The cultural appropriation bowl times too. Last year, he said that the Notre Dame was using cultural appropriation by saying they're the Fighting Irish because it was actually somehow in Boston College, and they didn't even play in the game. It was ridiculous.
And they lost 40-0.
It was kind of funny that Florida State's like, oh, Riley Leonard's back. He's going to be able to run. And that's how they defended it, and it didn't work out. And then they were like, oh, Riley Leonard can't run. And then they just kicked the shit out of him.
What about Oklahoma, Kansas? We intrigued by that at all?
Not really.
Not really?
I think that the Central Florida game was probably a little bit of a wake-up call. Like, both Texas and Oklahoma played really poorly coming off of bye weeks last week. I have a player prop in the Texas game, so I'll talk about the Quinn Ewers thing when we get there. Maybe, but Kansas has kind of shown the last couple of years that even though they're better, when they're playing teams with a lot more talent than them, like Texas kind of Texas really did just kind of handle them the last 2 years. Oklahoma should kind of get that, like I said, get that wake up call. The Kansas defense still isn't very good. Although if Jalen Daniels plays, I don't know what his status is. Maybe I'm interested. It's an early start time. Sleepy.
That's the asterisk. I think if Jalen Daniels is playing,
yeah, maybe
it might become interesting. If not, it's not.
He's coming off a back. He's dealing with a back injury and has barely played this year. Like, how effective is he going to be coming back? It's just a weird situation. I mean, trust me, I would love it. I would love if Kansas beat Oklahoma and take some of the heat off of Texas for losing to them so many times. But I don't think it's going to happen. There's some interesting. There are interesting games up and down the board this week. It's just like nothing that I'm like really, really fired up to watch. I'll read off a list of games to you guys if I can find it in the DMs that I sent you that I was like, hey, there's some like interesting stuff here. Let's find out if I can find it. I'm gonna save one of them because it's one of my bets. But Oregon State, Arizona, Pac-12 after dark personified. Cannot wait. 10:30 p.m. start in the desert. Let's rock and roll there. Troy, Texas State, two pretty good Sun Belt teams. Excuse me. There, UNLV, Fresno State, both teams are 6-1. Also tonight, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, the battle for the real GSU has actually kind of morphed into this like kind of fun local rivalry down in the state of Georgia. So if you're going to watch a game tonight, you can probably skip Bills Bucks and watch that instead. And then our FCS shout of the week, South Dakota State on the road at South Dakota, top 10 rivalry game. Not like ranked one of the top 10 rivalries, two teams ranked in the top 10. So there's good stuff. Up and down the board, it's just kind of you have to seek it out, and maybe it's a good second screen kind of week. It's like, okay, I'm going to pick a game, and then I might have a second screen. I mean, obviously with multi-view on YouTube TV, I can complain again about how I can't remember what the two games I wanted to watch last week. Oh, it was USC and I think the Clemson game, and they didn't have them on the same. But nevertheless, bets. I just realized that I have 5 potential bets. Phil, how many do you have?
1, 2, 3, 4.
You have 4, and we always let Matt go last because Matt will.
I don't know how many I'm going to have this week. I hate the board. It's gross.
I've talked myself into a bunch of these, so I guess I'll go first. Rice Tulane, the other game that I'm kind of interested in this week. I'm going to take the over 53 at DraftKings there. We've spent so many years, like 10 years now, wondering if JT Daniels was actually good. And he's finally found his role, which is the G5 stat patter god. He's gone over 300 yards 4 times. I think 2 of those were over 400 yards. Tulane's been kind of sleepy at times this year. I mean, they're undefeated. And I just think we're going to see points there. I'm playing the under. Our stinky dead nut Big Ten under of the week is Purdue, Nebraska, under 39.5. Nebraska's like whole offense is hurt. Nebraska's down like 3 offensive linemen, like 4 wide receivers are hurt. They've been dealing with issues at quarterback. Purdue's coach, Ryan Walters, grew up hating Nebraska because his dad was the quarterback at Colorado. Hold on, sorry. My throat's dry as hell. I'm dealing with some allergy stuff. So I'm going to go under 39.5. By the way, both teams stink there. Oh, I'm going to take Oklahoma State and lay 7.5 against Cincinnati. Emory Jones on the road is like, what? That is something I want nothing to do with at all there. If you haven't been keeping up with Oklahoma State, and why would you? They've won their last 3 games, and that's largely because they've just been giving Ollie Gordon the ball. He's gone over 100 yards in his last 4 games. He had 282 yards and 4 touchdowns at West Virginia last week. Cincinnati is probably the worst team in the Big 12. 7.5 is a lot for any of these kind of like mid-tier stinky Big 12 teams, but I think Cincinnati might be the bottom of the barrel. And then, guys, maybe a shade of Texas optimism for me. I'm going to take Xavier Worthy over 66.5 receiving yards in this game. Obviously, Quinn Ewers hurt. Texas isn't going to give an official diagnosis or an official timetable. It's an AC joint injury, grade 2. My internet sleuthing says 2 to 6 weeks. Pete Thamel said it's a multi-week injury, and he was all over it last year when Ewers got hurt. Said Oklahoma was going to be the earliest he'd be back, and that's what they were shooting for. So if he says multiple weeks, it's probably going to be multiple weeks. Malik Murphy is going to be the guy. We're not going to see Arch Manning unless things go really, really, really poorly, which could happen. Malik Murphy's thrown 8 passes this year. He's like the relief pitcher that throws one pitch, but that one pitch is a 102-mile-an-hour fastball. Go and watch. I mean, they're not hard to find. There's only 8 of them. Go watch his throws this year. He throws the ball so fucking hard every throw. He's going to hurt someone. If he learns how to take some...
Jalen Milroe.
Yes. If he learns, he's like Joe Milton in a lot of ways. He's also a linebacker. He's 6'5", 235 pounds. He's a massive kid. Live arm. And Texas is going to want to run the ball. We know that. But BYU, their rush defense is actually pretty decent. 15th in EPA per rush defense, 36th in rush defensive rushing success rate. They're 69th in EPA per pass defense and 114th in pass D success rate. And regardless of what the quarterback situation is, Sark's going to want to throw the ball. In 3.5 game or 3 3/4 games last year, Hudson Card threw it about 25 times per game with Ewers out. He had more experience than Murphy does, but Murphy's arm is a lot better than Card's, and Sark will probably let him air it out. Worthy's their best receiver. I think you're going to see Texas try to air it out. It certainly sucks that Quinn Ewers is down. We have no idea how long he's going to be down for, but I'm very excited just to kind of get to see what Malik Murphy has and that he's going to get his chance, because I don't think that he would win the job. I think there's too much politics at stake next year if assuming Ewers is gone. I think there's just too much politics at stake for him to just win the job. I think Arch Manning is the starting quarterback next year. I just don't think there's any way that that's not going to happen. But now Malik Murphy might have the chance to force Sark's hand, and give him a chance to keep that job or win the job next year, or he'll end up just transferring somewhere where he can. So those are my bets. Phil, what is on your card?
So first, I've got ND Pitt under 44.5.
Okay.
Pitt's offense is not very good. Notre Dame's defense is very good. Narduzzi's going to slow the game down and do some just like bullshit Narduzzi stuff. He's just going to be so annoying. He was quoted this week about he brought up a pass interference call back in 2018 against Notre Dame in a press conference. So
sure.
I see this game being pretty low scoring, anywhere from.
Is that the game he forgot Will Fuller existed? No, Will Fuller would have been before 2018.
But even still, It's just Notre Dame's offense has looked pretty average. They're getting a couple guys back to full strength this week, coming off a bye with Jaden Thomas and Jaden Greathouse, both coming back from hamstring injuries and should be full speed this week. Even still, I just see this as a low-scoring game, kind of a sleepy South Bend afternoon, so love the under there. I actually like Indiana plus 32 against Penn State. I think Penn State is going to come out and they're going to win handily. I don't think it's going to be that
such a gross game line.
Yeah, but like 32 feels like a lot coming off of an emotional ass kicking. And you'd like to think that James Franklin will kind of want to say, hey, we're really going to try to open it up and maybe get our quarterback some big time throwing experience, but instead they're just going to run the ball. So I see a pretty low scoring affair there. Duke Louisville under 46. Again, I think with that one, without Jawar Jordan and without Leonard, Mike Elko's defense is going to be awesome in that game. I don't think Jack Plummer is going to be able to do much, if anything at all. And then one that I'm very tempted, is the under for Maryland Northwestern at 11 a.m. in Evanston. And it's the first kind of cold north wind game coming off of Lake Michigan. The temperatures are going to be in the mid 40s, low 50s. So that one I'm going to monitor the temperatures, because if it does look like it's going to be a cold, because 48 to 50 degrees with over a 10-mile-an-hour wind in Ryan Field is freezing. Absolutely freezing. So that's one I'm going to be monitoring. So yeah, those are my ones. So that one's tentatively on my card. The Maryland.
What do you know about Midwestern weather, Florida boy?
I am soft.
You bailed. It was too much for you, so you bailed.
Too much for you. Can't handle the cold. You can't handle that Evanston wind in October. I like that pick. I'm not going to lie. I just can't bet it because it's absolutely gross. All right, I'm scrolling here.
You can't bet Northwestern, right?
That's true. I can't bet Northwestern.
Physically can't, yeah.
Oh, Phil can't either because he lives in Florida. That wasn't meant to even be an insult, but it came off as an insult, and Dan laughed. So in your face, Phil. I'm going to lay the 14.5 with Georgia. I am going to lay 6.5 with Oregon. I'm going to take 4.5 with Duke. I know Louisville stopped Notre Dame, but they look so bad against Pitt, and I don't think Jack Plummer's all that good. I think Duke's defense is really good. I think they're really well coached. And they were in that Florida State game for quite a while last week until Florida State just kind of pulled away at the end. So I like them in this spot, even though it might be a little bit of a letdown. I'm going to lay the 20.5 with Notre Dame. I'm going to take 10.5 with Cal hosting USC. I think that's just a weird, sleepy spot where USC could be very bored and Cal just runs the football well because USC's defense stinks. There was one game here that I'm laying 14.5 with Ohio State too at Wisconsin. I just think Wisconsin's terrible.
How many bets did you just give?
Enough. Yeah,
like, oh, I don't like the card this week, and you just gave us like 15.
You know, I didn't like the card, and then I scrolled DraftKings one more time, and I just started. I just threw. I blacked out. I don't know. I blacked out.
We ball. All right, I forgot I had one more potential bet on my card. There's no line for this game yet because it's an FCS game tonight.
Dan, sorry, I gotta jump. Corporate's calling, so I gotta run.
Later, Florida Phil.
Phil, we appreciate it. We love you. Enjoy your corporate day job. We'll talk to you next week, hopefully. So
Probably.
there are actually 2 top 10 FCS games this weekend. I talked about South Dakota State, also Montana State and Idaho State. Both of those games are on ESPN Plus. I will try to watch both of them. There is an FCS game on linear national television, and it's Long Island at Central Connecticut State tonight on CBS Sports Network. Bill Connolly from ESPN, he puts together his SP Plus rankings, and he did ranking from 1 to 657 from FBS, FCS, D2, D3, and NAIA. This is like team 302 versus 357 in the country on linear national television. A root field is like 15 minutes from my apartment. I am not going. So Bill Connolly's numbers say 7.5 is what the spread should be here. So is what CCSU, the Blue Devils, one of our local squads here. So if this line opens higher than 7.5, take the Sharks from Long Island. If it's under 7.5, take the Blue Devils from Central Connecticut State. If it is 7.5, we'll pass. FCS lines typically open probably in an hour to a couple hours. They'll open game day a little bit before if the lines get hung at all. So there you go. Whichever side of the 7.5 the line is on, we will take the underdog north of 7.5, the favorite under 7.5 in that game. Go Blue Devils. I have never been to a single game at Central Connecticut State. Their high school stadium their stadium is basically a high school stadium.
Well, you'll have to get there at some point.
Yeah, I mean the puppy's not gonna be home for a while. The puppy's gonna be at his at my in-laws' house because my wife has a work thing tonight. So he won't be home till late. I'm actually gonna be home alone most of the day. I could potentially go, but it's like, why?
That seems like a lot of work.
That's just like, why would I do that? So we're not gonna do that.
Like a lot of effort.
We appreciate everyone tuning in. I have no idea what the schedule is going to be next week. I have some ideas on potentially might just do a little hour worth of crate trading with the puppy next week to get a recap show. And depending on how the week goes, we'll find out if there's any more hilarious breaking stuff with this Michigan story. We will do that as well.
Seems to be something new literally every day with this thing.
Like every hour almost. It's been just absurd. It's my favorite story in the world right now because it's just so ridiculously stupid. I just love it. So we'll be back next week at some point. For Florida Phil, for Matt, I'm Dan. We will talk to you then. Good luck with your bets. We hope you guys have a great and winning weekend.